Hi everybody! Thank you to all those who attended the live session of Weeding for Wildlife on Friday, June 12th. My name is Fallon Neske and I'm the invasive species specialist with New York State Parks, as well as a moderator and a presenter of this webinar. We have a really great presentation for you today thanks to a special partnership between New York State Parks, Weed Wrangle, Audubon New York, the Garden Club of America New York Clubs, and the Native Plant Center at Westchester Community College. We all hope to inspire you to pull invasives and plant natives for New York's native wildlife. Before we begin, I do want to mention that this is a re-recording of the Weeding for Wildlife webinar held live on Friday, June 12, 2020. This webinar was held in celebration of the annual New York State Invasive Species Awareness Week. New York I saw as a time to educate and inform people about the impacts of invasive plants and animal species, as well as encourage communities to take action to help protect biodiversity. That being said, I'm very excited to introduce our first presenter for today, Casey McAllister. Casey is the Weed Wrangle Coordinator and first Vice Chair of the Garden Club of America's Conservation Committee. She's here today to tell us about a multi-state movement of volunteers who are rolling up their sleeves and removing invasive species. Take it away, Casey.
My name is Casey McAllister, and as you can probably already tell, I'm not from New York. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and a member of the Garden Club of Nashville, which is a member of the Garden Club of America. I want to speak to you today about our initiative, Weed Wrangle. I will tell you what it is, how it started, why it matters, and how you can join us as we wrangle our way across New York. In 2014, some of our club members were discussing the fact that there were invasive weed pulls happening almost every weekend somewhere in the city of Nashville. We thought that if we could just consolidate those events into one big event, creating a citywide partnership with all the public parks and green spaces, we could bring education and awareness to the problem of non-native invasive plants and an understanding to the importance of replanting with native plants, which supports conservation and restoration on public lands. So we scheduled a meeting with all the volunteer coordinators from public parks and green spaces across Nashville to pitch the idea of a one-day collaborative effort under the umbrella of Weed Wrangle. Really the same thing everybody's been doing on their own, but now hosting the eradication events on the same day, citywide, with a media blitz. My cute sister-in-law thought of the name Weed Wrangle, and a friend of my daughter's designed the logo, and the Garden Club of Nashville trademarked the name, really so the marijuana people wouldn't get it. That first year in Nashville, we partnered with 10 public parks. And to our surprise, we had over 500 volunteers. The next year, we called the other Garden Club of America clubs in Memphis, Knoxville, and Chattanooga and asked them to do the same. Today, 6 years later, we are in 16 states with thousands of volunteers in hundreds of cities. Along the way, we had some things happen that helped us launch our very much grassroots initiative. 4 years ago, we formed a partnership with Tennessee State Parks and Natural Areas that truly created a Tennessee statewide Weed Wrangle event. This year, we partnered with New York State Parks to host several Weed Wrangle events this spring, but then COVID happened. So we launched a nationwide stay-at-home Weed Wrangle. It was received with a lot of interest and enthusiasm since people were at home, and in some cases paying new attention to what's just out their window. Our move from Nashville, Tennessee to other states is a direct result of our affiliation with the Garden Club of America and their support through the Partners for Plants initiative, which is a joint effort between the Conservation and Horticulture committees. The Garden Club of America was founded in 1913 and has been involved in legislative activities since its earliest days. Of note, the Garden Club of America's Native Plant position paper supports any legislation that supports public land planting policies that use native plants, control invasive plants, and works to preserve and restore healthy ecosystems. Which brings me back to New York. Last spring, there was an article in the New York Times written by Margaret Wrinkle about weed wrangle. The title was "The Real Aliens in Our Backyard." The future of this country may depend on changing the way suburban Americans think about plants, which is exactly what we're trying to do. Educate the public to think differently. In New York State, there are 23 Garden Club of America clubs, 2 of which hosted weed wrangle events last year in partnership with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and the Nature Conservancy. This year, with our budding partnership with New York State Parks, we were working on more weed wrangle events to happen this spring. We were so disappointed with the postponement of those events, but the silver lining is this webinar and a chance to present the entire concept from hosting a weed wrangle event statewide to replanting native plants. Because a threat to native plants is a threat to native wildlife and our ecosystem. The power of collaboration through community partnership is the answer to the eradication of invasives and the renewal of natives. We hope that if you're part of the New York State Parks Network, you will consider hosting a weed wrangle event at your park. If you're part of the New York Prism Network, a GCA club, or an interested community organization or volunteer, no project is too small or too large. It's all about education, eradication, and the replanting of natives. And together, we can make a difference. For more information, see our website. And if you're interested in hosting a weed wrangle event, please contact our New York Weed Wrangle coordinators, Chris Duncan and Andreas Stewart, or Fallon Netsky at the New York State Parks. Thank you so much.
Casey, thank you so much for telling us all about weed wrangle. I know New York State Parks hopes to host a few in 2021. Again, my name's Fallon Netsky, and I'm the invasive species specialist with New York State Parks. I'm here today to give you a little introduction to invasive species and tell you how to ID a few you might find in your own yard, like this old piece of garlic mustard here. For those who are not familiar, New York State Parks has over 250 facilities across New York State. Within our agency, we have a stewardship division, and housed within the division is the invasive species unit. This is where you'll find me enjoying my work days, educating park staff, park patrons, partners, and a friend or two about invasives. But I also provide support to our invasive species field teams, and these folks are really the ones who do all the work. So let's start from square one and define the difference between a native and a non-native invasive species. Native species are those that live in a particular community or occupy a specific habitat. They may even have a specific niche within their native environment. But the key thing to take away here is that native species have natural predators, and these predators help keep populations in check or in balance. So what is a non-native invasive species? Non-native invasive species are those that have been introduced to a new area outside of their natural range or habitat. And upon introduction, they cause or are likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. So what makes these species so invasive, or why do they have such adverse impacts on our ecosystems? Generally speaking, invasive species have few natural predators in these areas where they've been introduced, and therefore have nothing to keep their populations in check. They also often have high reproductive rates and produce abundant number of seeds. They typically have longer growing seasons. You may notice that they're the first ones to pop in the spring. And they're also known as pioneer species. They thrived in these really disturbed areas where our natives have much more trouble establishing. The photo on the right is a Japanese knotweed sprout poking through pavement. On top of it all, it's important to keep in mind that many of these species often do not provide suitable habitat or food sources for New York's native wildlife. Today's talk is mostly focused on what we do at home or in our neighborhoods, but I want to link that back to New York State parks and really natural areas in general by saying that invasive species do not know boundaries. They don't recognize a fence line or a property line, so what we plant at home may very well spread to our parks. Think about wildlife that may pass through our neighborhoods picking up berries or having seeds stick to their feather or fur. Think about seeds that are dispersed by wind. Think about all of the trails that we walk or hike in our favorite pair of shoes picking up mud caked with seeds. Think about plants that can spread by fragmentation, such as Japanese knotweed, which may establish itself on the shore downstream from our backyard oasis. And since we're talking about removing invasives today, it's also important to think about how we dispose of them after they're out of the soil. Ask yourself, am I just moving this plant from one location to another? The best way to never have to deal with invasive species is to prevent them. So let's plant native and let's clean our shoes. But this invasion curve shows us what happens after a species is introduced. As time moves forward and nothing is done about the introduction, the infested area or population will grow, making it more difficult to control and more costly. Many land managers are equipped with a toolbox full of techniques to help control invasive species, which leads us to what we call integrative pest management. When trying to eradicate invasive populations, managers are often more successful when they use a combination of control techniques. A rad eradication recipe, if you will. But our state parks drug teams focus on manual and mechanical removal of invasive species, which is what I want to share with you today. I'm going to dive a bit deeper into the identification and control of two common invasive plants in our neighborhoods, but I want to share this list of invasives commonly found in our gardens or landscapes. This is not a comprehensive list, it's just a starting point for us all, but take a photo with your phone or take a screenshot and bring this with you to the plant nursery the next time you're thinking about doing some work in your lawn. I do want to note that New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation and Agriculture and Markets have a list of New York State prohibited and regulated invasive plants, which we'll share a link to in our list of resources. First up is garlic mustard. This species is native to Europe and Asia and was likely brought to the United States for medicinal purposes or as a food source. This species is a biennial, so in its first year you'll see these kidney-shaped basal leaves hanging out close to the ground, similar to the photo in the top right. You'll also notice that the leaves have these rounded teeth on their edges or on the leaf margin. Garlic mustard can be a little difficult to identify in the first year, but if you crush up the leaves, they produce this really pungent garlic odor. The other three photos show us garlic mustard beyond its first year, with more triangular shaped leaves that have coarsely toothed edges. These leaves alternate along the long stem, and if you were to crush the leaves, they still have that garlic scent. You'll also notice the tiny white four-petaled flowers and these four-sided tubular seed pods. Fun fact, there are a lot of really great pesto recipes out there that utilize this invasive plant. Garlic mustard can form these dense stands in the understory of our forests, blocking sunlight and creating competition for our native species that grow during spring and early summer, as garlic mustard is one of the first plants out in April. Studies show that this species is allelopathic, meaning it releases chemicals that may hinder the growth of other plant species in the area. There's also research out there about how this species may hinder other relationships, such as those between plants and soil fungi. I encourage you to dive a little deeper into this information. So if we're going to remove garlic mustard in our state parks, we start by properly identifying the species and then assess the scale of the infestation. I'm going to talk about hand pulling today, which is most often used with smaller populations of garlic mustard. This species is really great to work with new volunteers. The best time to pull is before the plant goes to seed to avoid spreading, but this is also a great time to take advantage of those soft soils. We're going to remove this species by hand, so our best tools are going to be our hands and maybe a nice pair of gloves. Grab a hold at the base of the plant and give it a pull to try and remove the entire taproot. Place the plants in a bag, tie them up, and you can place these in the trash. You'll have to work at this for several years depending on the population size, as garlic mustard seeds remain viable in the soil up to 10 years. So make sure you get every last little plant. I also want to mention that there are studies out there that suggest that this chemical releasing plant may have an effect on its own populations. So I encourage you to check that out as well. Next up is Japanese barberry. This species was likely brought to the U.S. as an ornamental, as it is quite attractive. This species can be identified by its vibrant green to purple leaves, these zigzagging branches. It has sharp thorns that stick straight out from the branch, these roughly pea-sized yellow flowers, and these bright red berries, which you can often see all year long. So if you think you found a barberry shrub, but you're not quite sure still, you could cut into the roots or scratch the roots, and you'll find that this vibrant yellow color is revealed, which you can see in the top right photo. So what are its impacts? Well, this photo was taken in a chestnut oak forest at one of our parks in the lower Hudson Valley several years ago. Japanese barberry covers the forest floor, blocks out sunlight, and competes with our native species, and often impacts forest regeneration. While not all invasive plants provide favored habitat for native wildlife, barberry does provide habitat for white-footed mice, and white-footed mice are often favored hosts for the black-legged tick, which may carry Lyme's disease. So here you'll see the same checklist that we used for garlic mustard when planning a removal. Since barberry is a woody shrub, we'll need some hand tools for this one. At parks, we try to control barberry in the spring when soils are softer and it hasn't gone to seed, but if we can't, we will work on this species in the fall, and this gives us a bit of a head start and work for the following spring. I'm going to show you a demonstration video of Japanese barberry being removed by Alyssa with a pickmatic, which is a favored tool by our strike teams. But if you're at home, a shovel and loppers or hand pruners can work just as well. Before going out, remember your personal protective equipment such as safety glasses and gloves, as barberry does have those sharp thorns. So Alyssa starts by stepping on the plant to provide access to the soil. It's easier to use your feet than your hands because it does have those sharp thorns. She's then going to use the pickmatic to break all of the side roots, aiming to make a circle around the root crown to get that clean removal. If you're using loppers or hand pruners, you can use these to cut those side roots and use the shovel to help expose them. All right. Again, the species is one that we often leave on site, tipping it upside down to allow it to dry out. Alyssa's showing us that bright yellow color of the roots that's revealed when we do remove barberry. Removing this shrub will leave a small hole in the ground, so it's important to fill it in or pat it down. And remember that invasive species love these disturbed soils. While I've shared the work that we do in state parks, I did want to leave you with a really great resource for taking action at home or in your neighborhood. The New York State PRISMs, or Partnerships for Regional Invasive Species Management, work hard to create regionally focused invasive species resources for all of us. I'll share the link to this website in our resources list as well. Next up, we have Carolyn Summers, author of Designing Gardens with Flora of the American East and a steering committee member of the Native Plant Center at Westchester Community College. She is also a proud owner of Flying Trillium Gardens and Preserve located in the Catskill Mountains. Carolyn will be taking us on a journey through many gardens to show us what native species we can utilize to stand up to encroaching invasives and begin rebuilding habitat.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Fallon. And hello, everybody. I have the lucky job on this webinar of giving you some ideas to restore your property after you've put in the hard work of tearing out the invasives. But first, some background on why we're emphasizing replanting using native plants. For those of you already familiar with the work of Doug Ptolemy, this will be a quick refresher. For some of you, this may be new ground, and I highly recommend Dr. Ptolemy's books, Bringing Nature Home and Nature's Best Hope, for more information. The fact is, some plants are simply more important than others. Maybe not to you or me, but to the insects that form the base of our food chain. As most of you know, monarchs require milkweed to complete their life cycle. Milkweed species are the only host plants. In other words, the only plants that monarch caterpillars are able to eat. But it's not just monarchs. It is most of our butterflies, moths, and even many bees that require specific native plants to thrive and reproduce. The relationships between plants and animals evolved together over millennia, which is why non-native or exotic plants are not part of and can't contribute to our food web. So moving outward along the food web, approximately 96% of baby birds can't eat seeds or berries and need lots and lots of insects to survive. But the pest-free trees and shrubs offered for sale by most nurseries won't produce any. We are beginning to understand that our pest-free gardens are ecological wastelands. No insects equals no birds. To sum up this quick review, I've concentrated on the first bullet. You are already dealing with the last one. If we keep introducing new exotics, we will continue to add to our workload, as so many turn out to be invasive. But let's turn our attention now to repairing the disturbance and returning beauty to the landscape. One of the plants Fallon talked about was garlic mustard, which usually grows in shade. What are some of the plants we can put back into those shady places? In this photo, taken at the New York Botanical Gardens Native Plant Garden, we can see Tiarella cordifolia, foamflower, in bloom, together with Canada ginger, trilliums, dwarf larkspur, and mayapple. Here in this garden, we're seeing Jacob's Ladder in full bloom, another excellent ground cover. Pachyra aurea, golden groundsel, blooms in spring with petite yellow daisies, but once the flowers fade, the glossy, rounded green leaves remain evergreen, similar in effect to Japanese pachysandra. In all of these gardens, ground covers are working together as a resilient community. The more successful your ground cover matrix, the less weeding you will need to do. A well-established ground cover layer will actually prevent most weeds from germinating. Here we have Pachyra again in the foreground with ferns, and woodland phlox, very long blooming and readily available at most nurseries. Don't ignore violets. Our native ones are important house plants for fritillary butterflies and others. This garden is successfully transitioning from degraded woodland, once overrun with invasive exotics, to healthy ground and shrub layers. Blue wood aster is the star of this autumn landscape. Moving upward into the shrub layer, maple leaf viburnum is one of only 2 native viburnums that tolerates full shade. It is compact, with white flowers, blueberries, and lovely fall foliage. Now moving out into the light, suppose you have been tearing out Japanese barberry or multiflora rose, or both. Here are some excellent replacements. Viburnums for sun. We have some American cranberry bush viburnum, some wild raisin. In this slide we have shrub dogwoods, which also offer flowers for pollinators and us, and berries for the birds. Possibly my favorite spring flowering tree, the flowering dogwood. And dogwood berries are extremely high in lipids, the best type of nourishing fat for long-distance neotropical migrants. Evergreens provide important winter habitat, and this one also provides nutritious berries for the birds and serves as host plants for moths and butterflies. Our most important species are the oaks. They support more than 500 species. There are a couple of dozen different species native to the Northeast. With so many to choose from, there is an oak to fit every garden. My favorite moths, the giant silk moths, need oaks to feed their caterpillars. Here's one that reminds me of Alice in Wonderland's hookah-smoking caterpillar. Disease-resistant native elms are featured in this photo. You can read this slide for yourself. It sums up reasons to plant more trees. Remember, if you plant an invasive tree, it's really hard to deadhead it. Moving on to perennials. Those in the aster or daisy family, also known as composites for their compound flowers, are useful to more insects as host plants than any other flower family. Plants in the aster family include Joe Pye, Pachyra, which we've already looked at, ironweed, and the goldenrods. These newly hatched monarchs are filling up on nectar before their long journey south. Orange milkweed is another host plant for monarchs that works well in smaller gardens because it doesn't spread by underground runners like the common milkweed. It adds a bright spot of color from June to July. Bright red Oswego tea, or also known as bee balm, will attract hummingbirds as well as the bees and butterflies. Hummingbird moths have to be one of our most enchanting insects. People have asked me if they are baby hummingbirds, which is a good guess. But no, they are day-flying moths, lucky for us so we get to see them, and in their caterpillar stage they require native viburnums and other native plants to eat. Now let's look at some ways to put all of these beautiful and useful plants into our home landscapes. Here is a typical perennial border that hides a stone wall. This award-winning garden at the Native Plant Center showcases native plants in a formal setting. Looking at plants for ponds and rain gardens, here we have varieties of our native swamp azalea, Rhododendron viscosum. These heavenly scented shrubs can also grow in average garden soil, but are useful for low wet spots. Sweet pepper bush, Clethra alnifolia, blooms in the fall, and as its name suggests, is honey-scented. It comes in various shades of white or pink and also different sizes. It prefers moist soil, but it is very adaptable and drought tolerant once established. Another good substitute for buddleia. Butterflies love this plant. Another native plant that grows naturally in wetlands, blue flag iris, can also grow in evenly moist soil. It seems to be especially attractive to bees and small skipper butterflies. One of my favorites is tall meadow rue, seen here in combination with Joe Pye. These two tall plants together make an impressive background or screen. I couldn't resist throwing in this close-up of the meadow rue flowers like little stars, and the tall masses together appear cloud-like. In this photograph, we have a much drier upland field, just the sort of area that you may have been working in yanking out Japanese barberry and multiflora rows. With luck, a field of goldenrod may take their place. Goldenrod has a bad rap. Some of the more aggressive species can take over. Not a good choice in a confined garden, but fields like these are extremely important to migrating insects like monarchs. And these red admirals. In 2017, we enjoyed a mass migration of painted ladies, shown here in this field of asters. If you are removing invasive shrubs, you are creating a disturbance, in this case a good thing. It is also an opportunity to add some diversity. Once you have created an opening, try overseeding with tough natives like asters and bee balm. Or another tough native like blue vervain, Verbena hastata, especially good in moist meadow areas. The slight disturbance of a later fall mowing is often enough to allow additional overseeding. Well, that's all I have time for. I hope I've given you a few good ideas for your restoration project.
Thank you, Carolyn, for those beautiful slides. I'm Karen Thomas, Chair of Audubon, New York, and this morning I would like to introduce you to Audubon's Plants for Birds database and to share with you the importance of planting natives to support our birds. Birds not only bring beauty and joy to our lives, they are pollinators, seed dispersers, and indicators of the health of an ecosystem. Birds are a wonderful on-ramp for us to care about our environment and a compelling incentive to plant native plants. The wood thrush is a bird whose beautiful song rings throughout our eastern forests, from suburban woodlots to expansive tracts of undisturbed forest. His flute-like song reminds me of late-day hikes in the Adirondacks. But our forests are growing more quiet as the wood thrush and many other songbirds are disappearing at an alarming rate. They have experienced a cumulative decline of 55% over the last 50 years. The story of the wood thrush is a story of what is happening in our yards, our neighborhoods, local parks, our workplaces, as well as in the larger ecoregion and in the tropics. 1/3 of all migratory forest birds are in decline in North America. There are many reasons for the decline. These birds face threats during all phases of their life cycles, on breeding grounds, wintering grounds, during migration. Habitat loss is by far the greatest factor, more than 2.5 times more significant as any other. But we can help by identifying and removing invasives and their threat to the ecosystem, and by using native plants. We can restore and create habitat to provide birds with the food, the shelter, and the nesting sites they need throughout the year. A diversity of native plants will offer a variety of food in summer, winter, spring, and fall for nesting, migrating, and wintering birds. They need insects, nectar, berries and fruit, nuts and seeds. Without the native plants, we won't have the insects, and without the insects, we won't have the birds. This dark-eyed junco, caught with his mouth full, is one of the 96% of land birds that rely on insects to feed their chicks. And baby birds eat a lot. In the 16 days before their chicks fledge, a chickadee pair brings up to 570 caterpillars to the nest per day to feed their young. 9,000 caterpillars for one clutch of chickadees. Native plants, and particularly native trees, host an astonishing number of caterpillar species, and therefore an astonishing amount of food for baby birds. White oak is a top host for caterpillars, supporting 557 species of caterpillars. A non-native ginkgo supports only 5. Nectar provides essential sugars for birds. As this ruby-throated hummingbird builds her nest and raises babies, she needs nectar from summer flowers such as this trumpet honeysuckle. On her way south for the winter, with a 500-mile nonstop crossing of the Gulf of Mexico ahead of her, if she doesn't have enough fat to make it across the Yucatan, she will drown. Your yard is on her way. Give her nectar for refueling. Highbush blueberry is our #1 recommended native shrub to plant for birds, especially to replace the invasive burning bush. It has the same beautiful dark red and purple foliage, white bell flowers in spring, delicious fruit in summer, and it surprisingly hosts over 200 species of caterpillars. Birds and berries all year round. Serviceberry and cherry for birds during the breeding season. The only time I see cedar waxwings in our yard is now when they are gobbling up the fruits on our amelanchier. Dogwood and spicebush fruit support songbirds flying south, and here is our wood thrush eating flowering dogwood berries. Our resident northern mockingbird feeds on winterberry when the fruit sugar has intensified by the cooler weather. Bayberry. This is great near driveways, sidewalks, and parking lots because it's resistant to salt. And birds don't eat the fruit until late winter, so this plant, along with cedar and holly trees, help birds survive late winter ice and snowstorms. Chickadees and finches depend on energy-rich seeds from native sunflowers, asters, and coneflowers, especially throughout the winter. So don't deadhead everything in sight and leave some flowers to go to seed, and the finches will thank you. Many seeds last through March as well and even provide food for early spring migrants. Grasses provide seeds for birds as well as cover and nesting habitat. Jays, nuthatches, and crossbills depend on protein-rich energy of nuts. Blue jays go nuts, literally stashing enough acorns to last until next spring. This bird is an ecological force, caching 3,000 to 5,000 acorns in one fall season. Evergreen trees like this rhododendron provide nesting sites as well as important shelter from cold and cover from predators, especially in winter. Hemlocks, hollies, pines, wax myrtles, and junipers, especially the eastern red cedar, are also important for birds. Different bird species prefer different layers of vegetation for foraging, building nests. Think of a habitat as a home with several stories. Trees provide the canopy layer or overstory like our oaks. The mid-story layers are created by small trees and shrubs, dogwoods, amelanchier, or winterberry. And the understory is provided by ground cover of grasses and broadleaf herbaceous plants. where to find information on the best native plants to support birds and wildlife. Audubon's native plant database has been designed to help people find answers and get involved. Simply enter your zip code, as well as your email if you'd like to receive an email to plant list, and click Search. The database will show you a customized list of plants native to your area, and it is filterable by the type of bird you would like to attract, by the type of plant, trees, shrub, perennials, remember the importance of those layers, and by the food source, insects, fruit, seeds, nuts, nectar. Find resources for more information in your area. Audubon centers and 27 chapters statewide, botanical gardens, plant societies. The Native Plant Center is 15 minutes from my home and offers classes at Go Native U and an annual native plant sale. And you can also find where you can purchase native plants nearby, as well as online native plant retailers. Visiting local nurseries, connecting and sharing ideas with fellow native plant enthusiasts is my idea of a good time. This database is a living document. You can contribute by keeping it up to date with places and plants you want to add. It provides a framework to start your native plant project or a reference to discover another perspective on plant selection. All the elements to be personalized for creating your own garden. Now that you have selected the native plants best for your project, check out Audubon's native plant website to make your yard fully bird-friendly. Birds need clear, fresh water for drinking and bathing. 72% of residents applied pesticides to their lawns, and 7 million birds are killed annually from pesticide exposure. Native plants are often hardier than non-native ornamentals and thrive without pesticides or fertilizers. Birds and wildlife like a bit of mess, a twist from our traditional approach to a neat and tidy garden. Find a corner and make a brush pile for wildlife. Brush piles not only provide shelter and cover, they provide good foraging habitat in the enriched leaf litter beneath. Many of our cavity nesting birds are struggling because development means fewer snags. If it's safe, leave it up or cut it back. We have an old spruce that was hit by lightning over 15 years ago. It looks like a piece of sculpture and is home to tree swallows, tufted titmice, nuthatches and woodpeckers, and a perch for hawks and our great horned owls and their 2 juveniles. Embrace the mess and leave the leaves. That's where a lot of birds like our wood thrush spend their time foraging. Caterpillars overwinter in leaf litter and many other insects live there too. Leaves and twigs of trees and shrubs help build up the soil and attract many other insects that are great food for birds. Our wood thrush will thank you. A layered native plant garden with water, free of invasives and pesticides, with a bit of mess, will create a healthy, supportive, and welcoming habitat for birds, for bees and other pollinators, and for us. Thank you. Now back to Fallon, our wonderful partner and the organizer of this Weeding for Wildlife collaboration.
That was wonderful. As mentioned, we wanted to provide you all with a few resources. We hope that we have inspired you all to take a deeper look at the impacts of invasive plants and the role that our native plants have in supporting our wildlife. Thank you all for joining us during this special New York State Invasive Species Awareness webinar, and thank you to all of our partners who helped make this event happen.